Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of the Rams Review podcast. And today we are joined for a special preview edition of probably the biggest game of the season for Derby County against Hull City. And no one better than the man who's going to join me this afternoon to tell me all about Hull City is Baz Cooper from the Hull Daily Mail. Baz, good afternoon, and thank you for joining me.
Hello, Chris. How are you?
I'm very well,
You well?
thank you. Yeah, I am well. A lot better beating the Baggies on Monday than I was losing to the Hatters on Friday, but we've got on from there. So here to talk about the big game for the next 15, 20 minutes and the all kinds of implications it has on both teams and where we could end up being after this game. But first of all, let's talk about Hull City. Obviously, the last time we saw you guys, it was a pretty drab 1-1 at Pride Park. Have the expectations been met by Hull City and the fans, or has it been a pretty drab season?
It's been a disastrous season, if we're brutally honest. The only positive that can come out of it is that the football club survives, and obviously that's not a foregone conclusion, as we know, because with 2 games to go, although City have got a 2-point advantage over Luton and goal difference, they still need to beat Derby basically to guarantee their survival. They could be safe, of course, if Luton were to lose at home to Coventry, and a point would be enough, but only victory makes it mathematically certain and avoids us having to go to Portsmouth on the final day, needing anything. Yeah, it's been a torrid season, pretty much from the moment Liam Rossini was sacked. 3 or 4 days after last season finished, it's been a tumultuous year. Really, they were on. City were a club going well. Recruitment was strong. They'd got a manager that was well liked by the players, the staff, the supporters, obviously a former player, and somebody, of course, that everybody at Pride Park knows only too well as well. So I think the feeling at the end of the season was obviously tinged with disappointment that they missed out on getting in the playoffs, and the kind of the fallout from that was big. Ultimately, Liam lost his job. The owner, Adjun Ilajala, decided to make that decision, and people will make their own opinion of whether that was the right decision or the wrong decision. He went after Tim Walter, who was known in Germany at Hamburg for playing an attacking, shall we say, brand of football, which he brought over to England, but it never worked. It was kind of doomed to failure pretty much from the get-go. The players didn't buy into it. The players didn't like it. And ultimately, he was dispensed of. Not to be fair, not too long after we came to Pride Park, when Xavier Simons, who's no longer at the club, rattled one in from 20 odd yards out at Pride Park. So it's been a disaster, Chris. To be fair, Ruben Sayers inherited the job in mid-December. The team were bottom of the table, and it's been a real struggle to kind of get them going forward. They've obviously not won back-to-back games under Ruben. Every time they've won 9 games, the previous 8 occasions they've not been able to back up a victory, which has been a huge problem for them. Goals have been a massive problem. They're behind Luton, the lowest scorers in the Championship. So, they've got a good side. They just don't have any goals in it, and that is, defensively they've been okay. If you look at their goals conceded, they're fairly middle of the road. Generally when they lose, it's 0-1. Often at home, but they, like at Swansea on Good Friday, they lose 1-0. They lose 1-0 to Luton, a bit like obviously Derby did at Pride Park on Good Friday. So it's been awful. Key figures behind the scenes have left. Some of them rightly so, I should say, but still that adds to uncertainty. They've had some big players. They spent a lot of money in the summer. Nearly £10 million on Liam Miller. And Mohamed Baloumi, the 2 wingers, both did their ACLs early in the season. They signed another player from Monaco, very, very good midfielder, Elliot Matazo, in January, did his ACL at Cardiff. They've got Oscar Zambrano, highly rated young midfielder from Ecuador. They signed him in the summer with a doping ban hanging over his head. He was then banned on November the 5th for 18 months for an offence that was breached before he came to England. So it's just been a catalogue of disaster after disaster. But, fingers crossed that Ruben and the players can get themselves out of it and at least get into the summer still a Championship side. There you go, I've waffled.
Where would you actually point your finger to where it's gone wrong? Is it the panic button being pressed all the time, changing the management, or do you think there's a deeper reason for this team really suffering? Because I had Hull top six this year, and I think it's a surprise to everybody that we are playing you on Saturday, both fighting for our lives.
Yeah, look, I think there's been a raft of poor decisions, and look, it all points back to the change of manager. And look, Adjun decided that he didn't agree. There was a lot of things he didn't agree with Liam on. It wasn't just over style of play was one thing, which is kind of ironic actually. The owner wanted a more attractive style of play, and he's got anything but that now because he's got, Ruben is a very bright manager, and he likes to play attacking football, but he hasn't got the players, so he's having to play a very defensive kind of brand, if you like, because he knows if he goes gung ho, he'll get picked off, and they'll end up being 3-0 down before they can get a chance. So the owner hasn't got from this what he wanted. So I think there's a catalogue of poor decisions. I think the appointment of Tim Walter was a poor decision. Recruitment, for me, football's very, very straightforward, Chris. It always has been, and it always will be. The teams that score the most goals are genuinely the ones that do well. The teams that concede the most aren't. And 9/10 of it is down to recruitment. And in the last three years, they've signed over 60 players since Ajum Eligella bought the club in January 2022. Not many of them are still at the football club. They've spent an awful lot of money, and they've got very little reward for it. As an example, just I'm plucking one example out of thin air. They signed a player called Doğukan Sinek, who was a highly rated Turkish winger. They signed him in July 2022, I think it was. They spent about £4 million. He came from Antalyaspor in Turkey. Played a few times for the Turkish national team. He's not played since October 2023 away at Ipswich. A defeat. He came off the bench away at Ipswich in a 3-0 defeat back in, I think it was October, November 2023. He's not played since. He's been out on loan to Turkey a couple of times. He's now back. He's coming back to fitness, but he's not going to play again. He's out of contract. And there's been so many of those players that are coming in. They signed a lot of players late on in the summer window, just gone. Some of them barely made an impact and were shifted on. They signed Marvin Malem, who was a German midfielder wanted by the former manager, shipped out in January. They signed Chris Bedia, a striker. Funny enough, up until a couple of weeks ago, he was one of their top strikers with 3 goals. He's not been at the club since January, moved on. There's a lot of players that come in for short periods and they're gone again, and they cost the club an awful lot of money, but there's no impact, there's no end product, whether it be goals, assists, or whatever. There's a lack of longevity from them. So I don't think there's a lot of fans are now pointing the finger squarely at the owner for sacking Liam Rossini, and obviously he's got heavily involved with. He was always involved with Fenerbahce, his boyhood club back in Turkey. He became vice president of Fenerbahce back in the summer. Naturally, with respect to Acun, who I know quite well, he's got a big media business that takes a lot of time. He's the owner of Hull City, which takes a lot of time. He's now vice president of Turkey, and all the politics and all the nonsense that goes with being involved in a huge football club over there. He's also involved in Maribor in Slovenia. So, having previously been involved in Shelbourne, but sold his stake in Shelbourne last year because it wasn't quite what he wanted. So, I think there's a collective amount of decisions that have been poor, and ultimately it all falls back at the owner's feet. Whether he's responsible for every single one or not, ultimately it's the same as David Clowes at Pride Park. He carries the can. He runs the football club. He funds the football club, and if decisions are made, it's on his watch, and he has to carry the can. And it's the same with the owner here. And God willing, they do survive in the next 2 games. There's going to be a huge autopsy. There's going to be a huge kind of looking back on what's gone wrong and where they go from here. And if they get relegated, I dread, any club in the Championship that's losing £500,000 a week, effectively, that then falls into League One. It doesn't bear thinking about, does it? Derby know that only too well, the implications of going into League One, to stay in the league, and then the autopsy can continue, or can begin, I should say.
Do you think that if you do unfortunately end up being underneath the dreaded dotted line, do you think that he will contemplate selling? Do you think that it'll be a mess that just be too much for him to show time or money or interest in, bear in mind his other responsibilities?
I think it's a difficult question to answer, and it is a question that a lot. It's not beyond the realms of possibility, but then who buys a League One football club saddled with a lot of debt ultimately to the owner? What I would say is Adjun bought the club from the much maligned Alam family in January 2022, and he inherited a club that had been very well, in fairness, financially well run. They had no debt. They had an asset in Keane Lewis Potter, who ended up going to Brentford for £15 million. They had an asset in Jacob Greaves, who, albeit was not quite as far down the line as he was when he moved to Ipswich for £20 million or £18 million last summer. But the Adjun inherited a club in fantastic financial health. What that situation isn't the case now. They've got a crumbling training ground, and that was one of the lack of legacy from their Premier League forays previously under the former ownership, is that they never invested in the infrastructure and the training grounds. So they've got a decrepit training ground that's not really fit for purpose. I just don't see who comes in with the type of money that the current owner would want to buy the club, unless it went into administration and then somebody could pick it up for a quid. But that's obviously a big leap from where we are now. It's a really difficult question to answer. But ultimately, he has bitten off more than he can chew. He's got far too much on his plate, and he basically, in a roundabout way, admitted himself last summer that he'd taken with the elections at Fenerbahce, he'd taken his eye off the ball with transfers at City. Everything was done relatively late. They signed, I think, 14 or 15 of their 17 players after the final pre-season game at Reading, which ironically against Ruben's team. That's not a great place to be in. So everything, and that made it, in fairness, that made it difficult for the former manager Volta to try and knit a squad together when he'd got players coming in from all over Europe. Some of them were at different levels of fitness. Some of them had pre-season. Some of them hadn't. Some of them didn't speak the lingo. Some of them had never played in England. And it was just it's just, as I say, the whole thing has been a complete and utter mess from pretty much the final whistle going at Plymouth on the final day of last season. And they're paying for it. And ultimately, it's not a surprise. For those of us that were part of pre-season and out in Turkey at pre-season last year, we were concerned because of the squad, the style of play, and it's not been. I remember saying way back in the autumn that the club was sleepwalking into a relegation battle, and I take no pride in being proven right, but it was obvious back then that they were in real trouble. They couldn't keep clean sheets. They weren't winning at home. They couldn't score goals. They've got a fragile squad, a manager that the players didn't like, and there was no chemistry there. And it's just continued. And Ruben has got them competitive, but every team in the Championship is competitive. So you need a bit more than that to stay up. But he can get a result. Obviously, coming from behind to beat Preston on Monday was massive, particularly given the way they lost at Swansea, which does rankle a bit because it was such a bad penalty decision. It hit John Egan in the face. The referee gave a penalty for handball, but there we go. Preston would argue that the first one that City got on Monday, was not a penalty either. So does it even itself out? I'm not really sure. But yeah, it's just been, as I say, in terms of selling the club, I'm not sure. I just don't. If they get relegated, I don't see who buys it. And if they stay in the league, I think he'll give it one more go. And they've got the basis of an okay squad. If they stay in the division, they can get players back. With 4 or 5 sensible signings over the summer, they've got the ability to be competitive in the top half of the table next season. But they've got to find goals from somewhere because they just don't look like scoring.
Well, I was going to say, looking at your last sort of 8 games on the form chart, there's something that's quite obvious, and that is your scoring power is probably similar to Derby in the sense that you either win by the odd goal or lose by the odd goal. Picking out the best and the worst of your last 8 games, obviously, I'm going back to sort of the 4th of March where you beat Plymouth 2-0 at home, and then you just mentioned the previous game where you beat Preston at home 2-1. There's some seems to be good results on there on paper, but then there seems to be some bizarre ones. What would we say is sort of been the lowest of Hull recently, and what's been the highest? What sort of give you optimism, and then you look at a game and think, oh Jesus.
Probably the lowest has got to be the Luton game, really, because obviously, as you'll know yourself from what happened on Friday, is it was such a huge game, and the problem with City in recent, probably since the turn of the year, they went to Sheffield United and won 3-0, inflicted, and that was at the time where Sheffield United hadn't lost at home in the league all season, and they were doing really well. They went there and won 3-0, but then they lost at home to Stoke. So it's kind of like you'd be better off losing at Sheffield United and beating Stoke because you're giving a leg up to your rivals, which they did. They then go to Sunderland, who were again at that point hadn't lost in the league at home. They win at Sunderland, but then go to Cardiff the following Tuesday and lose a really poor game 1-0, and then again give a leg up to their rival. So it's kind of, the highest. If I'm honest, they had before the international break. They had four really. They went 4 unbeaten. They had 2 wins and 2 draws. They went to Bristol City. Started brilliantly. They were a goal up at Bristol City. João Pedro, brilliant finish, but then within 90 seconds has a complete mental breakdown and gets sent off. And then it's a case of, right, you 1-0 up after 15 minutes, but you're down to 10 men. They backs to the wall and they end up drawing 1-1. Bristol City get a penalty and they end up coming away with a 1-1. But you say that's you're taking a point before the game at Bristol City, given the form they were in. Then you go to West Brom, final game before the international break. You go 1-0 down. You battle back, you get a late point, and in truth, they had 2 glorious chances to win the game, City, and they didn't take them. But they get a point again at West Brom. At that point, given how don't forget we're going back pre-break here.
Yeah.
West Brom were in decent form. You probably go, that's not a bad point. But then they came back after the international break, and they've not. They were really poor. They lost, as I say. They've got a real problem after the international break. I think they've got the worst record in the Premier League and Championship in the last 15 games post-international break. They've only won 1. So they lost to Luton. They were okay in the first half. Came out the second half. 20, I think it was 20 odd seconds. Louis Coyle, the skipper's come across to clear. You've probably everybody's already seen it because it was a joke. It was everywhere. He's come across to clear the ball. It's hit Alfie Jones on the back and spun in the back of the net. That was start the second half. They never looked like getting back in the game. And then pretty much since they came back, they've been really poor. The highlight has to be going to Sheffield Wednesday, obviously in these parts, a big Yorkshire derby, and it was a really, really awful game. But like both teams, it felt like both teams were playing in their flip flops, despite the fact that City needed to win it, and it was heading for a really poor 0-0 until 93 minutes, and Charlie Hughes batters in an absolute flying header in front of the away end at Leppings Lane, and that you kind of felt that was the moment they won 1-0. That moment in front of the away fans in Sheffield would have given them the real kick up the backside to go and win back-to-back games. They then went to Watford again, another really tepid game, another goal they conceded straight after half time, lost 1-0. Then they draw with Coventry, which is probably a decent point given Coventry where they were. And Coventry played well. Then they go to Swansea and concede a shocker of a penalty and lose 1-0. And then they play Preston, go 1-0 down at half time to Preston's only shot on target, and then get 2 penalties in the second half and come back and win 2-1. So they're just really they're infuriatingly inconsistent, Chris. And I think ultimately that's probably why they are where they are. Look, the Championships, I don't think that, apart from obviously the top 3, I think the Championship's much of a muchness this season. I don't think there's a great amount in it. You look at Norwich have sacked their manager today. Only a couple of weeks ago, they were on the verge of the playoffs. They're now, down in 14th, and they could actually be overtaken by a couple of teams. I think City could move if Norwich didn't win and City were to win their 2 games, they'd finish the season 2 points behind them, which is mind-boggling. I don't think there's a huge amount in the league. It's just at the top end they're a little bit more consistent than the teams at the bottom, and they've just got that firepower. They've got those, instead of having your top goal scorer on 6 goals, their top goal scorer might be on 12 or 13 goals. Instead of losing the game 1-0, they're perhaps winning the game 2-1 or 1-0. So I really think that the Championship, bar the top 3, as, I would say weak as it's been, but as even. You look at Plymouth, at home, Plymouth are almost unplayable, and they're giving a real fist of it, and they're beating teams that you wouldn't expect them to beat at home. So I don't think there's that much in it, but it is just consistency or lack of in Hull City's case.
I saw that Plymouth got something like 24.2% possession against Coventry and got the win, and somehow it needs or a must. So quickly about Derby, you've obviously seen them play. Have you seen a lot of them in the last sort of John Eustace period? 'Cause obviously, I think you would have seen them live when the previous management was in house. What do you make of the Eustace era?
Well, I don't like to say this, but I am quite close to the football club because my wife is a Derby fan and a season ticket holder, and her family are all that lot as well. So I'm quite close to them. Unfortunately, as a staunch Red, I'm I just keep thinking back to, and obviously you've got Callum Alder as well. And I know Callum well from his time at City. I was always conflicted, Chris, because I loved Paul Warne, and then he went to Derby, and I was like, oh my crikey. Anyway, so and what he said, I know he got a lot of stick for saying Derby were a League One team with sugar on the top, and I look at Derby's squad, and I think he was bang on. Yeah, fans will debate all day long about the way that Paul had set his team up in the Championship, and particularly the impact that John Eustace has had. But I do think it is a weak squad compared to a lot of squads in the Championship. But John's come in, he's got them organised, he's playing to their strengths. There's no frills about Derby, is there? It is. Callum Alder was brilliant at City when City won the League One title 3 or 4 years ago. Him and George Honeyman were brilliant. They had the most assists in the division from set pieces, whether it be free kicks, corners, throw-ins, and whether it be a long throw-in playing into Craig Forsyth, playing off the second ball. What Derby do is quite straightforward. It's not groundbreaking, it's not rocket science, but what John has been able to do, and he was incidentally a manager that Adjon looked at after Tim Volter was sacked. He was a manager they considered, and even spoke to at one point when he was at Blackburn. So he's well respected and well liked in the corridors of power at Hull City. But yeah, he's done a terrific job. I think a lot of people were a bit eyebrow raised when he left Blackburn. I think if he dug a bit deeper, I don't think anybody was surprised. He wanted to move closer to his home. He was living in the hotel 5 nights a week out when he was at Blackburn. He wanted to move closer to the Midlands. He's obviously got ties to Derby from his spell as a player, and he's done a great job there, hasn't he? And what I would say is, Derby were obviously cut adrift, and to win those 4 games in a row was hugely vital, because without them you'd be cut adrift now. All that did was get Derby back in amongst it again. But he plays to what he's doing isn't rocket science. It's playing to your strengths. If you've got a team, a group of players that are relatively limited in their ability, which Derby are, and I don't mean that with any disrespect, but they are. You play to what you've got. You play to Callum Alder's ability from set plays. You play to Craig Forsyth being able to win headers and then get players around him that can do things. You've got Mendes Lang with pace in behind. Use those players. Don't try and try and be something you're not. And I think Eustace has done a terrific job. He's very, very good though. He did a fantastic job at Blackburn with an average group of players. You look at the job he did at Blackburn last year. He got Sammy Smodics was their one standout. He did a phenomenal job at Birmingham. They were in the playoffs. Ridiculously, they sacked him for Wayne Rooney. Birmingham wouldn't have been in League One had they have not sacked if they'd have kept John. So, I don't think it's a massive surprise that he's a very, very clever football manager that can get the best out of a group of players with with limitations. And I say that with no disrespect at all.
So that leads on to sort of the penultimate question: How do Hull City beat Derby, and vice versa? Is there a fear that you have with Hull City and the Derby County result?
Yeah, I think my concern about Hull City, and it's not changed, is they struggle to break teams down. We saw it with Luton. Luton just came had no intent in. Luton had almost zero intent on playing forward. It was we're going to sit in a low block, as the phrase is now, isn't it? It used to be sitting deep, but it's now the low block. We'll put 11 men on the edge of the box. We'll play up to us. They had at that point they had Morris and Adebayo. Obviously, Elijah's now done his ACL, so he's out. But what those two strikers did, they occupied space. They occupied Charlie Hughes and Alfie Jones, and then they would play off them. They would play on the set piece. They had a lucky break with the goal, but once that went in, they just sat in and offered. There was no space in behind. They literally put 11 players on the edge of their 18-yard box and said, "Come on, then break us down." And City were just not good enough to do that. And my worry is that Eustace is bright, and he will look to try and do similar. He will say, "Look, come and break us down." And the problem Hull City have got is they have no pace in the team, probably aside of Abu Kamara, and it's kind of telling that in many ways the best player on the pitch against Preston was 38-year-old Nordin Amrabat, who was a January signing from AEK Athens. He was he's very clever. He's a wily old fox, but they've got to find a way of creating that space. I mean, Plymouth. I think back to the Plymouth game, and Plymouth they opened them up. City opened them up with some clever passing. Gustavo Puerta in midfield. They operated with João Pedro and Kamara. They were able to pick them off fairly easily. Slightly different against Oxford. Obviously, Derby fans know Gary Rowett all too well. He's very astute. I thought Plymouth were just too naive in how they played, but they are rubbish away from home, and that's why they're going to get relegated, because they're awful away from home. But yeah, for me, my worry about the game on Saturday is not only Hull City's home record, which isn't great, although it's had one defeat in 6 now is better than it has been. But it's breaking Derby down, and if Derby get that first goal from a set piece, which is plausible, is then when Derby, if Derby were to go 1-0 up, how the crowd react, and how does City break them down? How do Derby are fairly comfortable. The two centre halves will want the ball onto their head. They'll be able to head it clear and whatnot. So they've got to be a bit cleverer. They've got to be a bit more astute in there. They've got to move it quickly. They've got to try and pull Derby out, get them out, get them in behind. But as I say, pace has been my. I always think pace is crucial, and we see it at Forest with Hudson-Odoi and Alanga. It tears teams to pieces, and City don't have players really that can pull teams to pieces. So they've got to play a different way. But yeah, I'm really fascinated, Chris, to see how both teams approach it. Given that Luton play in the half 12 against Coventry, Coventry need to win because obviously they've had a couple of poor results, beating Plymouth. What does the Luton result, whatever that may be? I mean, I kind of think Luton will probably win that. But if Luton lose, then City know that they know then a point is good enough against Derby, and they're with goal difference they're effectively safe. If Luton win that game, pressure's on both teams. Derby obviously, are only outside it on goal difference. There's so many permutations, and I'm just fascinated to know what that Luton result does, because we'll obviously the players will be aware of it by the time they kick off. So it's going to be fascinating, stressful, horrific, but fascinating.
I agree. When I noticed that Luton were playing at 12:30, they can go one of two ways, but it changes a player's mindset. I don't care what managers say. A professional footballer's mindset will always change depending on what he sees prior. And the other permutation is if Luton do lose and Derby beat Hull, we are pretty much mathematically safe as well, other than a big goal swing of 10.
Well, you are. I mean, that's the thing. Like your goal difference is the same as Hull City's.
Yeah.
The concern that I've had and it obviously stems back to when you beat Preston, that City, you've scored 4 more goals than I can't remember. It's either 3 or 4 more goals than City. I think it's 43 to 47. And obviously, if it comes down to goal difference, then Derby, obviously, you would need a certain sequence of results for that to be effective. Obviously, it would need Derby to win at Hull City, then Derby to lose against Stoke, and Hull City to get a point against Portsmouth for them. So I know I'm jumping ahead there. But yeah, I mean, the carrot for Derby is massive. You win at Hull City, you are effectively safe, irrespective of what Luton do, because of the goal difference. I mean, our goal difference is the same as yours, -9. Luton's is -23. So that isn't going to. It's almost impossible for there to be a swing of that size in the final 2 games, given how few goals everybody scores at the bottom. So, the carrot for Derby is huge, and obviously you've got the game against Stoke on the final day, and who knows what Stoke's going to turn up. They're safe pretty much. I know it's only 4 points, but realistically, they're safe. They've had the Tonkin at the place we shan't mention yesterday.
We don't mention that word either.
No, we don't. No, we don't. So look, for me, it's just a massive. I'm astounded it's not been picked for television. It's given, the way things are. I can't believe they've not picked it for television, because I think it's going to be. I think the drama's going to be, the tension will be palpable, and there'll be a full house there. Obviously, Derby have sold their allocation. It'll be packed from the home stands, and like I say, it's just from City's point of view. I wonder now, as I said before, the 8 previous occasions they've won under Ruben, they've not been able to back it up with a second victory. This is the final opportunity now. If it's a huge carrot for them to say, right, final home game of the season. If we win, we're mathematically safe. Let's not worry about points and goal difference. We beat Derby County, we are in the Championship next season.
Yeah.
It's been an awful season. Let's park that for now. Let's just focus on beating Derby, and we are in the Championship. And that is the carrot for Hull City. The carrot for Derby, of course, is Derby need a result, because if they lose at Hull City, it goes to the final day, and they could even be, depending on what Luton do, they could be back in the bottom 3 come 5 o'clock. So yeah. It's huge for both. It's a massive game, and for both clubs going forward. For Hull City, it's not winning a Wembley final. It's not getting to an FA Cup final. It's not playing in Europe. For Derby, it's not a league title. It's not anything of that stature. But where we are now for these 2 football clubs, it is absolutely seismic, this game, because the impact at this stage of the season with only 1 game left, and it could be, if it goes bent for Hull City, they could be in the bottom 3 going to Portsmouth, and then suddenly it's not in their hands anymore, and then you're relying on Luton getting beat on the final day. You're then relying on Stoke doing City a favour and beating Derby. It's so big. It's so big, and my concern for Hull City is when the pressure's been on to back a result up, they've fallen away. They've not been able to do it. They've choked, basically. They've choked. That's not a too strong a word. They fought back against Preston when all results were going against them yesterday. They were jeered off at half time. They came back and they won the game. They should have won it a bit more comfortably, in truth. They've got to go and produce a result. But as I say, it's gripping, but not in a good way.
So the last 2 minutes, we'll fill it with this simple question: your prediction for the game, the score, and who are the 3 that unfortunately tumble into the absolutely horrible League One?
My heart says that Hull City will win the game. My head, based on the body of work that I've got in front of me that I've seen so far, suggests they won't, and it'll finish probably 2-2, and it goes to the final day, because I think Luton will get something against Coventry, because Coventry are flaky, and I think Luton are so, obviously have got a bit of form. The bottom 3, Plymouth are gone. Their away form is shocking, and even so, I don't see how the goal difference, them in Cardiff, obviously, I think Plymouth's goal difference is minus 37. Cardiff's is the same as Luton, minus 23. So I think Plymouth have gone. I think it'll be Cardiff as well, which is a shame, because I enjoy my trips to Cardiff, although they don't tend to end well. I do enjoy the odd Welsh cake. And if push comes to shove, this is my 2nd season wanting Luton to get relegated after the Premier League last year. So I'm going to say Luton, but I'm not going to commit to it, Chris, because there's so many twists and turns. Preston are in awful form, so I wouldn't rule them out. Oxford are still in it because they've not been able to pull away. Obviously, City, I don't know. And I'd love to say Derby, but I might get a slip in my face when I finish this. So, I'm going to go with the 3 that are there now and say that Luton go down kicking and screaming, but back-to-back relegations for Luton. They won't have quite enough. I think Derby will eke out. Derby will get beat at Hull City, but they'll beat Stoke on the final day to survive. I'm happy, relatively. You're happy, and I get a summer where I'm not in the doghouse all summer.
Well, You know what? I will say, for saying that you're married to a Ram, and obviously you're a devout Red Dog, as we call you. Fair play to your patience and commitment to your marriage. I think that the bottom three has a twist in it somewhere. And you
I think
mentioned
it does.
Preston.
Well, yeah.
I think Preston is the twist. I think I've got a very good friend of mine who's a Preston fan, and he uses the word dog. And the last word, I'll let you finish. But he says they're terrible, and he has real fear for them. But
Well, the thing is for them though, one winning 13, and they knocked it around for 20 minutes yesterday. It looked all right. They didn't never had a shot on target. They looked okay, but that's not form you want at this stage of the season.
no.
But obviously, they play Plymouth on Saturday, which is a tough. That's a massive decider. But then they go to Bristol City on the final day. I mean, when you look at Luton, Coventry at home. I mean, I was thinking a couple of weeks ago. I was thinking, well, West Brom play Luton, Derby, and Cardiff in the final three. They're gunning for the top six. Well, what impact does Tony Mowbray getting sacked have? So there's so many permutations. So many. I know there's only 2 games left, but there'll be twists and turns, and we just got to hope we're on the right side of it.
Absolutely. Well, Baz Cooper from the Hull Daily Mail, it's been amazing and fascinating. And where can people follow you on social media? Because I'm sure you've got a story and a piece to write between now and the end of the season.
Oh Christ! On Twitter, my name at Baz Cooper 84. No, sorry, at Baz DJ Cooper. I get confused with various things, and just obviously the Hull Daily Mail website. Colleague of Lee Curtis, I know Lee well. Of course, obviously the Telegraph. So yeah, all that. There's loads of stuff. They'll be on the web over the next few days, leading into the game, and we'll have our own. At the 1904 Club is the Hull City podcast. We'll have a preview of our own ahead of the game. We have myself, Burnsley who formerly worked at the BBC. We have David Prutton of EFL legend, of course, the recent video at Pride Park, and Catherine Batt, as well as a Telegraph. Daily Telegraph? Yeah, Daily Telegraph now. She wasn't the Daily Mail. I get confused. Too many things going on. But yeah, lots of stuff in the build up to the game. And if you want to listen to some more football waffle looking ahead to the game and find out more about Hull City, check out the 1904 Club podcast.
Brilliant. Baz, thanks for your time, mate. That's the Rams Review podcast preview. Derby County versus Hull City. Come on, you Rams.